Start the Mangala. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalaakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manovishnam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Datati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Rupatakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagarjatam Sagana Raghunatham Nitam Samsajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parjana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपति गोपीशा गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये पंचकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय हरे कृष्णा Srimad Bhagavatam 1.13.11 chapter 13 verse 11 अपीनासु सुहृदस्ताथा बान्धवा कृष्णदेवतः दृष्टासु त्वान्वा दृष्टः श्रुता वा यादवः स्वपूर्यां सुखमासते अपीनासु सुहृदस्ताथा बान्धवः कृष्णदेवतः दृष्टाः श्रुतवा यादवः स्वपूर्यां सुखमासते अपीनासु सुहृदस्ताथा बान्धवः कृष्णदेवतः दृष्टाः श्रुतवः यादवः स्वपूर्यां सुखमासते. Anyone want to recite?
Sir, I tried.
Okay.
Apina surdastatata banhava Krishna devata drista surtava yadava swapuryam sugam asate. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Okay, next. Okay, continue the synonyms. Apina Surdastata Bandhavah Krishna Devatah Drishta Shrutavah Yadavah Swapuryam Sukamasate. Api, whether Na, our Surda, well wishers, Tata, oh my uncle, Bandhavaha, and Krishna Devataha, those who are always wrapped in the service of Lord Sri Krishna, Drishtaha, by seeing them, Shrutaha, or by hearing about them, Va, either Yadava, the descendants of Yadu, Swapuryam, along with their residential place, Sukam Asate, if they are all happy. Translation: my uncle, you must have visited Dwarka. In that holy place are our friends and well-wishers, the descendants of Yadu, who are always wrapped in the service of the Lord Sri Krishna. You might have seen them or heard about them. Are they all living happily in their abodes? So this is the point where Vidura was being welcomed by his family in Hastinapura. So after the war, once Maharaja Yudhishthira took over, he was in charge of the kingdom and also the family. So uh, Vidura has written after going on the pilgrimage, and in the previous verse we saw about how everyone was very curious to know about uh, how the kind of experiences he gained throughout his pilgrimage. So in the previous verse, especially in the purport for the previous verse, the main description about was mainly about what is a place of pilgrimage. So the essence of the purport of the previous verse 1:13:10 was that the a place of pilgrimage is not merely a place where we go to take bath in the holy river. What is more important is to um, be in the association of devotees and also gain knowledge about the Supreme Lord by being engaged in Krishna Katha. So that is only such places can be regarded as places of pilgrimage. So it is not that we always have to go to places where the holy rivers flow. Any place where devotees are engaged in Krishna Katha, all such places are as uh, pure and holy as the places where the holy rivers flow. So in this verse, um, uh, Vidura is being inquired about whether he went to Dwarka. Purport, the particular word Krishna Devata, those who are always wrapped in the service of Lord Krishna, is significant. The Yadavas and the Pandavas, who were always wrapped in the thought of the Lord Krishna and his different transcendental activities, were all pure devotees of the Lord, like Vidura. Vidura left home in order to devote himself completely to the service of the Lord. But the Pandavas and the Yadavas were always wrapped in the thought of Lord Krishna. Thus, there is no difference in their pure devotional qualities, either remaining at home or leaving home. The real qualification of a pure devotee is to become wrapped in the thought of Krishna favorably. That is to say, knowing well that Lord Krishna is the absolute personality of Godhead. So, this is the main point which actually defines this term, Krishna Devataha. Those who are always wrapped in the service of Lord Krishna, they actually know very well that Lord Krishna is the absolute personality of Godhead. So here it is mentioned about the Yadavas, Pandavas, and also Vidura, who are being termed as Krishna Devata, those who are always wrapped in the service of Lord Krishna. So the Yadavas, the uh, the dynasty where Lord Krishna decided to um, take birth in this material world. Pandavas and Vidura, they belong to the same family. Lord Krishna is related to the Pandavas through what is the relationship between Lord Krishna and the Pandavas?
The
How are
mother,
they? Through
the mother,
the
Kundi
mother of,
Devi.
the mother of Pandavas, and she is the
Auntie.
but how?
She's the
Mm,
uh, Krishna's father's sister.
yes, the sister of Vasudeva. So they are related in that way, but between the Pandavas and Vidura, they are even more directly related because Pandavas, the sons of Pandu, and Vidura is actually their, he's also their uncle, but we can clearly see how the stark contrast between the Pandavas, Vidura, and also the other side in the same family. So, in many ways, uh, it has been described by many scholars about the uniqueness of uh, the first verse of uh, Bhagavad Gita, because it is quite ironic that though the Bhagavad Gita is termed as the song of the Supreme Lord, the first verse was spoken by the main antagonist in the entire Mahabharata. So, in that very first verse itself, uh, in Bhagavad Gita 1.1, Dhritarashtra Vacha, Dharmashetre Kurukshetre Samaveda Yutsava Mamaka Pandavas Chaiva Kim Akurvata Sanja. So, in that one verse itself, and that is actually the only verse where Dhritarashtra actually spoke. So, in that one verse itself, he uh, unleashed his, he revealed his mindset about how he was viewing the Pandavas, though they all belong to the same family. So it is nothing new, because in many parts of the Bhagavatam itself, we can see many other examples, like people in the same family behaving differently towards Lord Krishna. Another similar example we can see is in the case of Prahlada Maharaja. So the son was such a staunch devotee of the Supreme Lord, but the father was regarding himself as enemy number one of the Supreme Lord, and he got exactly what he deserved. Apart from that, we also see examples from any other examples apart from Mahabharata and also the pastimes of Prahlad Maharaja. Any other examples where people in the same family have different moods towards Lord Krishna? There's also one example from the Ramayana, actually not just one. If we consider the example of Kaikeyi, apart from that example, there's also another example in the family of Ravana himself. In that Asuric family, there was a devotee, Vibhishana. So, despite all these surrounding factors, the pure devotee will always be firmly uh, absorbed in the devotional service towards the Supreme Lord, despite the fact that, especially in the case of Prahlada Maharaja and also Vibhishana, in both of their cases, their family members were all belonging to the Asuric type. But those pure devotees, they were always firmly absorbed in the devotional service towards the Supreme Lord. And when we talk about devotional service, we know that we know about the Navavida Bhakti. So through those 9 pillars of Bhakti, they were always absorbed in the thoughts about the Supreme Lord. And it is also mentioned here that Vidura left home in order to devote himself completely to the service of the Lord. But the Pandavas and the Yadavas were always wrapped in the thought of Lord Krishna. Thus, there is no difference in their pure devotional qualities, either remaining at home or leaving home. The real qualification of a pure devotee is to become wrapped in the thought of Krishna favorably, knowing well that Lord Krishna is the absolute personality of Godhead. So whether we leave home to go to all those so-called places of pilgrimage where Krishna Katha may not even happen nowadays. What really matters is that even if we are at home, we have to completely uh, utilize our time by dedicating it fully towards devotional service, uh, uh, by Shravanam Kirtanam and also uh, other types of devotional processes according to time, place, and circumstances. But of course, we know that the simplest and the easiest two ways are actually mentioned uh, in the beginning of the verse itself, Shravanam Kirtanam. Those two types of activities can be performed anytime, anywhere, and that is actually what is meant for us, especially the Kali Jivas. So, chanting the holy names of the Supreme Lord can be done anytime. So, Kirtanam uh, does not simply mean does not simply refer to talking about the pastimes of the Supreme Lord or giving long lectures. Even our japa session is regarded as kirtanam. So, of course, uh, as we are engaged in these different devotional processes, as we progress further, we will also gain the ability to uh, contribute according to our abilities. But as mentioned here, whether we remain at home or we leave home, the real qualification is of a pure devotee is to become wrapped in the thought of Krishna favorably. So, Vidura is regarded as a pure devotee because though he left home, he was absorbed in the thoughts of the Supreme Lord. And that's why he was received by his family members, and they are also eagerly inquiring from him about how his pilgrimage went, because they know for sure that he would have utilized his time fully in devotional service towards the Supreme Lord. And therefore, they are so curious to know how his pilgrimage went. And another related verse from the Bhagavad Gita, which was spoken by the Supreme Lord himself, is from chapter 8, verse number 7. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu ma manusmara yudhyacha mai arpita mano buddhir mame vaishya samsaya. So, in that verse, the Supreme Lord clearly says, therefore, always do your duty of fighting and while always thinking about me. So that is an even more important point to be noted, because we all cannot simply renounce our material life and material duties. But what the Supreme Lord actually wants us to do has been made very clear in that one verse alone. Always think of me and do your duty. Arjuna was a Kshatriya and he was a Grihastha, but still the Supreme Lord spoke the Bhagavad Gita to him. That itself sets a very significant precedence about how even a Kshatriya and a Grihastha, like those qualities are like completely opposed to the usual type of devotees that we know to be more spiritually inclined. Normally, whenever we talk about spirituality, people often have this impression of the Brahmana category and also the sannyasis. But the Supreme Lord spoke the Bhagavad Gita to a Kshatriya who was also a Grihastha, and he gave that very specific instruction that he wants, though it was directed to Arjuna, it is also meant for us who are involved in our material life. The Lord wants us to do our duties, but always remember Him. Why is it important for us to remember Him? So that He explains in 8.5. In chapter 8, verse 5, where He says, Antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kalevaram yaprayati samatbhavam yati nastyarcha samshaya. Those who remember me at the time of death, when at the time of quitting their material body, they will attain my supreme abode. So that is exactly the reason why it is very important for us, the conditioned souls who are now caught in this dukkalayam. If we want to liberate ourselves from this place of misery, we have to first train ourselves to be engaged in Krishna consciousness. So those 4 verses from 8.5 to 8.8, they are all interrelated, because the Supreme Lord spoke those 4 verses in such a way so that there will be no misconceptions. Because when he actually says that those who remember me at the time of death can attain my supreme abode. So some brilliant people might think that, okay, since Krishna says that I just have to remember him at the time of death, so I'll wait for that to arrive, and then at that time I'll remember him. But it is clearly stated in scriptures like the Garuda Purana that at the time of death, we will be experiencing pain that is equivalent to hundreds or thousands of scorpion bites. So at such a timing, we won't be able to control. We won't be able to have any form of control over ourselves. So it is impossible for us to plan what we are going to do at the time of death. Therefore, after speaking 8.5, the Supreme Lord also provides further clarification through 8.6, where he says, Yam yamapi smanbhavam chajachante kalevaram tam tam evaviti kaunteya sadatat bhava bhavitaha. So in 8.6, the Supreme Lord says, whatever thoughts one has at the time of leaving his body, that form he attains in the next life. So we have been going through all these 84 lakh apartments. Srila Prabhupada uses this analogy of apartments to explain how the conditioned soul moves from one temporary material body to another throughout our journey in this material world. As long as we do not purify ourselves from this material contamination, we have to remain in this dukkalayam, this material world. So as long as we remain here, we have to keep shifting from one apartment to another. There are 84 lakh apartments, the 84 lakh species of material bodies. Jalaja Navalakshani, Stavaram Lakshani Sati, Trimyo Rutra Sankyaha, Pakshinam Dasalakshanam, Trimsha Lakshani Pasava, Chatur Lakshani Manushaha. So the 84 lakh species of material bodies. Jalaja Navalakshani, 9 lakh aquatics. Stavaram Lakshavimshati, plants and non-moving entities, 20 lakhs. Trimayo Rutra Sankyaha, 11 lakh insects and germs. Pakshinam Dasalakshanam, 10 lakh species of birds. Trimsha Lakshani Pasavaha, 30 lakh species of quadrupeds or 4-legged animals. Chatur Lakshani Manushaha, 4 lakh human species. So like that, there are 84 lakh species of material bodies in this material world, where we can actually satisfy our material desires. The material contamination is there due to our desires to enjoy material sense gratification. For the conditioned soul to enjoy material sense gratification, the conditioned soul requires a material body, a particular material body, and therefore the Supreme Lord, through his inferior external energy, through the potency of Maya, he has created this material world with all these 84 lakh apartments where conditioned souls can enjoy material sense gratification by occupying the different material bodies. So, as long as we do not cleanse ourselves from these material desires, we will continue to be roaming from one material body to another. So, as long as this cycle continues, we can never attain our original place at the supreme spiritual abode of the Supreme Lord. Our origin is from there, because that is what the Supreme Lord himself says. In Gita 15.7, the Supreme Lord says, Mame Vamso Jivaloke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana Manashasthana Prakrishtani Krishyati. So originally, we are all eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord. Our true identity is that we are spirit souls. First of all, what we fail to realize as conditioned souls is that we are not this material body, we are spirit souls. So that is the first step towards self-realization. Once we understand that we are spirit souls and we are not this material body, then the next understanding is about our origin. Where does this spirit soul originate from? So that is what the Supreme Lord has mentioned about in Gita 15.7, where he says that the spirit souls are his eternal fragmental parts. The Supreme Lord does not see the spirit souls differently. He makes it very clear that all living entities are his eternal fragmental parts. So all the different living entities who appear to be occupying different material bodies, it is all due to their own material desires. From the past lives, the Supreme Lord has only given them the accommodation which they want to enjoy. So that is how we have landed here. And if we continue to remain helpless in this material contamination, then even at the time of death, we will be having thoughts which are not favorable towards Krishna consciousness. The material contamination will only make us continue our journey in this material world. One fine example which we can see is from the pastimes of Bharat Maharaj, who was so obsessed with that baby deer. So despite the fact that he was such a great devotee, but still that the thought which he had at the time of leaving his body, because of that, he had to return back to the material world. But we can see the exact opposite in the case of Ajamila, because at the time of death, he remembered the Supreme Lord and therefore he got a second chance. Though in the case of Ajamila, he uttered the Supreme Lord's name, it was not like he was immediately liberated. Still, he was given a second chance. So there is no shortcut in the process of bhakti. That is what the Supreme Lord that's why the Supreme Lord makes it very clear in all these four verses from 8.5 to 8.8. In 8.5, the Supreme Lord says, those who remember me at the time of death, they will attain my supreme abode. Then in 8.6, he says that whatever thoughts a person has at the time of leaving his body, that form he will get in the next life. So if we uh, if we continue to be materially contaminated, then that would lead us to our next birth in this Dukalayam. But if we are successful in uh, our journey of Krishna consciousness, then we can regain our original transcendental body and completely be liberated from this material world. So it all depends on the kind of consciousness that we develop throughout our life. And it is important to note that this can only happen throughout our lifetime. It cannot simply happen by thinking that, okay, I'll just remember Krishna when I'm about to die, because no one can predict when our death will arrive. So it is much wiser to simply follow the instructions of our acharyas and be fully engaged in Krishna consciousness and be prepared at any moment when death could arrive. So that's why the Supreme Lord also makes it very clear in verse 8.7 when he says, Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu. The Supreme Lord makes it very clear that it's important for us to remember him always. Though he said in 8.5 that those who remember him at the time of death can attain his supreme abode, but that is not a process which can be, that is not something which can be planned. And therefore, the Supreme Lord makes it very clear that it is important for us to be completely absorbed in his remembrance at always throughout our lifetime. And how to do that? It requires practice, as he mentions in 8.8, Abhyasa Yoga Vichena. So, a pure devotee will always be engaged in remembrance of the Supreme Lord through the Navida Bhakti process. And for us, the Kali Jivas, who may not always be able to be engaged in all the 9 processes, we have the 2 simplest processes, Sravanam, Kirtanam. And another more important point mentioned here is that those, the Krishna Devatas, those who are wrapped in the thought of Krishna favorably, they know very well that Lord Krishna is the absolute personality of Godhead. So this is also another very important point, because the ones who are termed as Krishna Devata are the ones who understand that Lord Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. Another very important point. So from the purport to Bhagavad Gita 2.2, which begins with Sri Bhagavan Vacha, in that purport, Srila Prabhupada explains about the term Bhagavan. And apart from that, there are many other pramanas from the scriptures which establish that Lord Krishna is Swayam Bhagavan, especially in the Srimad Bhagavatam 1.3.28, Krishna is to Bhagavan Swayam. Apart from that, there's also another important verse from Srimad Bhagavatam 4.31.14. This is actually from Canto 4, but it is a verse spoken by Narada Muni in his instructions to the Prachetas. In that verse, Narada Muni says, Yata Tarur Mula Nichechanaina Tripyanti Tatskanda Bujopashaka Pranopahara Chatendriyanam Tataiva Sarvaranam Achyuteja. So the important point mentioned in that verse is that just like we just like how the entire plant or tree gets nourished when we water the roots, and just like the entire body getting nourished when we supply food to the stomach, similarly, all the demigods will become happy when we worship Achyuta. Tataiva Sarva Arhanam Achyuteja. Achyuta Ijya. When we worship Achyuta, Lord Krishna, all the demigods will become happy. So this is also another important part from the Bhagavad Gita, where Lord Krishna himself provides a lot of detailed explanation, especially from 7.20. In Gita 7.20, the Supreme Lord says, Kamesh tasai kritajnana prapatyante anya devata tam tam niyamastaya prakritya niyatasvaya. Those whose intelligence has been stolen by material desires surrender unto demigods and follow the particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own natures. 7.21 Yo yo yam yam tanum bhakta shraddha architum chati tasya tasya chalam shraddham tam eva vidadami aham. I'm in everyone's heart as the super soul. As soon as one desires to worship some demigod, I make his faith steady so that he can devote himself to that particular deity. So the Supreme Lord who resides in the hearts of all living entities. He says that in 18.61, Ishvara Sarvabhutanam Hrideshe Junachistati. So as the super soul, the Supreme Lord knows about even our material desires. So those who have material desires, they are always inclined to worship the demigods who are in charge of the administration of the material planets. So due to these material desires and the inclination to worship the demigod, even that faith towards the demigod will be made stronger by the super soul who resides in our hearts. Endowed with such a faith, he endeavors to worship a particular demigod and obtains his desires. But in actuality, these benefits are bestowed by me alone. So the Supreme Lord further explains that those who are inclined towards demigod worship, they worship the demigods for some material benefits. But even those material benefits are given by, they appear to be given by the demigods through through the Supreme Lord's help alone. And further in 7.23, the Supreme Lord explains, men of small intelligence worship the demigods, and their fruits are limited and temporary. Those who worship the demigods go to the planets of the demigods, but my devotees ultimately reach my supreme planet. So it is not like the demigod worship process is completely prohibited. It is clearly explained from here that it is just that those who worship the demigods are less intelligent, because the main purpose of bhakti is to enlighten the conditioned soul about our helpless condition in this material world. If we continue to nurture our material desires by being engaged in demigod worship, then we can never find solutions to our problems. We can only attain the planets of the demigods, and we can only attain temporary pleasures. So we know that in the material universe, there are three main divisions: upper, middle, and lower planetary systems. So even those who are engaged in demigod worship, who have the material desires, they engage in the karma kanda activities, desiring to enjoy heavenly pleasures. Even those who get elevated to the heavenly planets, they are still stuck in that upper planetary systems, which is still part of this material universe. So that will not give us liberation. We can attain liberation only by getting out of this entire material universe. So that will only happen when we surrender to the Supreme Lord, because that's what the Supreme Lord um, mentions here. Those who worship the demigods go to the planets of the demigods, but my devotees ultimately reach my supreme planet. So who reaches the Supreme Lord's supreme planet? The Krishna Devatas, the pure devotees who understand that he is the absolute personality of Godhead, the supreme personality of Godhead. So uh, apart from that, there are also related verses, like in Gita 9.20, those who study the Vedas and drink the Soma juice, seeking the heavenly planets, worship me indirectly, purified of sinful reactions, they take birth on the pious heavenly planet of Indra, where they enjoy godly delights. 9.21. When they have thus enjoyed vast heavenly sense pleasure, and the results of their pious activities are exhausted, they return to this mortal planet again. Thus, those who seek sense enjoyment by adhering to the principles of the three Vedas achieve only repeated birth and death. So, from the verses we saw from chapter 7 and also these verses, we can clearly see that the more we continue to nurture our material desires through demigod worship, we are only going to further aggravate our already helpless condition. The Krishna Devatas, the pure devotees, they know and they are very clear about their ultimate destination, and therefore they are always focused on uh, what they want to do. That is what the Supreme Lord mentions further in 9.22. Ananya Chintayantomam Ye Jana Paripaste Tesham Nidya Viktanam Yogashyam Vahamyam. But those who always worship me with exclusive devotion, meditating on my transcendental form, to them I carry what they lack and I preserve what they have. So the Krishna Devatas, the pure devotees, worship the Supreme Lord with exclusive devotion, meditating on my transcendental form, on the Supreme Lord's transcendental form. So such pure devotees will be rewarded by the Supreme Lord, how he carries what they lack and he preserves what they have. So it can also be seen from these verses and the synonyms. So Srila Prabhupada has directly translated the Supreme Lord's words exactly the way he spoke those words. We can see from here, Ananya Chintayanto Mam. So the word by word meaning, Ananya, having no other object, Chintayanta, concentrating, Mam, on me. So this on me, there's this capital M here. Similarly, we can also see from many other verses like in Gita 9.34, 18.65, in all these verses, like also in 18.66, Sarva Dharman Parityajya, Mam Ekam Sharanam Raja, Aham Tvam Sarva Papebhyo, Mokshe Shami Ma Suchaha. So here also we can see Mam Ekam Sharanam Raja. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. So it is very similar to what we saw in 9.22. Mam, unto me, capital M. So it is clearly referring to the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord makes it very clear that those who surrender to him can attain the supreme abode. So the Krishna Devatas, the pure devotees, know this. There's no use if we continue to nurture our material desires and further increase our material contamination in the name of demigod worship. Now, just because I'm saying this, people might misunderstand that I'm actually bashing demigod worship. What we have to understand is that simply by following Narada Muni's instructions, we can understand that worshipping the Supreme Lord Achyuta alone can satisfy all the demigods. So it is not a question of disrespecting or insulting the demigods. Simply by surrendering to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as explained by Narada Muni, just like how a plant is nourished when we water the roots, just like how the body is nourished when we supply food to the stomach. Similarly, all the demigods will also be satisfied when we worship the Supreme Lord. So it is never a question of disrespect to the demigods. We just have to follow the advice of Narada Muni. We can clearly see based on the analogies which he has given. Very often we see that whenever someone waters any plant, if the person is pouring water to the leaf, we can see the kind of blunder that he's making. But it is the same thing that that is being done by those who are engaged in demigod worship. Though they may enjoy material benefits, all these material benefits are temporary and they will only continue to further nurture their material desires. And even when we talk about these material desires and demigod worship, different demigods grant different types of material benefits. So those who are having different material desires, they will continue to worship. They'll continue to transfer their worship from one demigod to another according to their material desires. So that cannot be regarded as process of bhakti because they are merely looking for someone to be an order supplier according to their material desires at that particular point in time. So we can never liberate ourselves from this dukkhalayam by further nurturing our material desires. The only way is to surrender to the Supreme Lord by realizing that He is the absolute personality of Godhead. But we can also see from Gita chapter 7 that the Supreme Lord Himself, He acknowledges about the two types of people. In 7.15, the Supreme Lord says, Tamam duskritino muda prapajante naradama maya partanyana asram bhavamashrita. Those miscreants who are grossly foolish, who are lowest among mankind, whose knowledge is stolen by illusion, and who partake of the atheistic nature of demons, do not surrender unto me. So the Supreme Lord has made it very clear in many verses from the Gita that those who surrender to Him can be liberated. However, He also acknowledges this fact that there is also the other category of the other four categories of people who never surrender to Him. This has been mentioned in 7.15. Then in 7.16, the Supreme Lord also talks about the four categories of people who surrender to Him. So in the purport of 1.13.11, it is also mentioned the Krishna Devatas are those who become wrapped in the thought of Krishna favorably, knowing well that Lord Krishna is the absolute personality of Godhead. Kansa, Jarasandha, Shishupala, and other demons like them were also always wrapped in the thought of Lord Krishna, but they were absorbed in a different way, namely unfavorably, or thinking him to be a powerful man only. Therefore, Kansa and Shishupala are not on the same level as pure devotees like Vidura, the Pandavas, and the Yadavas. So, in both cases, we can see that both the categories of people, they were absorbed in the thoughts of the Supreme Lord. However, only the Krishna Devatas, the pure devotees, understood that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Lord. The others, the demons, were regarding the Supreme Lord as just another mere mortal, and therefore they got exactly what they deserved. So why is why do we have these different categories, like many self-proclaimed intellectuals will also ask about these different categories of people. They might even ask, like, if God is so powerful, why doesn't he make everyone become a devotee? So those self-proclaimed intellectuals often come up with such brilliant arguments also, but we can clearly see the reason why if we study the Bhagavad Gita, actually the authentic versions of Bhagavad Gita, like Bhagavad Gita as it is. The problem with those self-proclaimed intellectuals is that they tend to always think that they are smart, but actually they are not. And they also always talk only on the basis of their so-called knowledge, which they get from cinema, serial, and WhatsApp University. So these distinctions, these different types of people exist in this material world because it is a place of duality. In the material world, everything is full of dualities. We can see that dualities exist everywhere, just like hot and cold weather, fame, fame, infamy, uh, and also many other attributes. Everything that we see in the material world uh, is full of dualities, and that is what the Supreme Lord actually explains in Gita chapter 15. In the beginning of chapter 15 of the Gita, the Supreme Lord explains about how this material world is actually a perverted reflection of the spiritual world, because in the spiritual world, everything is absolute. There is no duality in the spiritual world, but the material world is always full of dualities, and therefore we have these different types of people. Those who have the there's also another chapter in the Gita titled The Divine and Demonic Natures, Daiva Sura Sampada Vivaga Yoga, chapter 16. So in that chapter also, the Supreme Lord talks about the divine and demoniac qualities. Uh, but all these can be seen only in the material world, because this material world is indeed such a place. So that's why all these different categories of people exist in this material world. But there is no such duality in the spiritual world. And another important point, which is explained by the Supreme Lord in chapter 15, is that towards the first half of chapter 15, the Supreme Lord talks about the distinction between the material world and the spiritual world. Then in the second half, he talks about specific attributes of the spiritual world. And towards the end, he establishes his position as Purushottama. Chapter 15 is titled Purushottama Yoga. So towards the end of chapter 15, the Supreme Lord establishes himself as Purushottama, the one who is celebrated in both the material and spiritual world. So the Supreme Lord Purushottama, he is someone who is beyond both the material and spiritual world. So he is even beyond the spiritual world. It is not like he is an occupant of the spiritual world. The spiritual world itself is a byproduct of his energy. It is also stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, if I'm not mistaken, in Canto 2, about the division of the energies of the Supreme Lord. Three-fourths of the Supreme Lord's energy consists of the spiritual creation, and only the remaining 1/4 is represented by the material creation. So the 3/4, which comprises of the spiritual creation, that is known as Tripada Vibhuti, and the 1/4 is known as Ekapada Vibhuti. So the material world is such a place where all these dualities exist, and that's why the Supreme Lord himself has made it very clear in verse 7.15 when he says that there are 4 types of people who never surrender unto him. Then in 7.16 he talks about the 4 types of people who surrender unto him. So who are those 4 types of people? Chaturvida bhajante imam jana sukirtana arjuna artho jignasu ratati jnani cha pratarshava. So in 7.16, the same is, O best among Bharatas, 4 kinds of pious men begin to render devotional service unto me: the distressed, the desire of wealth, the inquisitive, and he who is searching for knowledge of the absolute. So in this verse, the Supreme Lord talks about the 4 types of people who surrender unto him, but in the subsequent verses, he also continues to further clarify about why the jnani is the topmost of these 4 types of people. So is explained in Bhakti Hindu that pure devotion is that which is without desire for material profit or gain through fruitive activities or philosophical speculation. That is called pure devotional service. So devotional service must be free from material desires, and that's why it is important to distinguish between demigod worship and devotional service. Demigod worship, which is aimed at fulfilling material desires to gain material benefits which are temporary, cannot be equated to devotional service, which must be without desire for material profit or gain. So the 4 types of people who surrender to the Supreme Lord consist of the distress, the desire of wealth, the inquisitive, and he who is searching for knowledge of the absolute. So the first category, those who desire for wealth, they those who are always busy with fruitive activities come to the Lord in material distress, and at that time associate with pure devotees and become in their distress devotees of the Lord. So this is one category, the distress. Well, those who are simply frustrated also sometimes come to associate with the pure devotees and become inquisitive, know about God. Similarly, when the dry philosophers are frustrated in every field of knowledge, they sometimes want to learn of God, and they come to the Supreme Lord to render devotional service, and thus transcend knowledge of the impersonal Brahman and the localized Paramatma, and come to the personal conception of Godhead by the grace of the Supreme Lord or his pure devotee. So the problem with the inquisitive people is that they may not have actually achieved that position where they have actually attained the Bhagavan realization. So only through association with pure devotees, the inquisitive people who were caught in the misconception about the impersonal Brahman knowledge or the Paramatma realization, once they come in the association of devotees, only then they get to transcend these subset areas to the topmost Bhagavan realization. On the whole, when the distressed, the inquisitive, the seekers of knowledge, and those who are in need of money are free from all material desires, and when they fully understand that material remuneration has nothing to do with spiritual improvement, they become pure devotees. As long as such a purified stage is not attained, devotees in transcendental service to the Lord are tainted with fruitive activities, the search for mundane knowledge, etc. So one has to transcend all these before one can come to the stage of pure devotional service. So the important points which clearly distinguish between these four categories of people are mentioned here. And another very important point is this: those who those who can be regarded as pure devotees are the ones who fully understand that material remuneration has nothing to do with spiritual improvement. That's why, again, we should not confuse demigod worship as devotional service, because demigod worship, as explained by the Supreme Lord Himself, is aimed at accumulating material benefits. But true devotional service is aimed at spiritual improvement. It is to further improve our current position as helpless conditioned souls to regain our original identity. So that will only happen when we realize the position of the Supreme Lord, the topmost Bhagavan realization. In the subsequent verses 7.17 and 7.18, the Supreme Lord continues to um, explain, of these, the one who is in full knowledge and who is always engaged in pure devotional service is the best, for I am very dear to him and he is dear to me. So out of the four types of people who surrender to the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Lord personally prefers the Jnani, because the Jnani is the one who clearly understands about the topmost Bhagavan realization. The Jnanis have the topmost and the most confidential knowledge, which has been explained by the Supreme Lord Himself. So that is how the Jnani is distinct from the other four types of people. But still, the Supreme Lord further clarifies in 7.18, all these devotees are undoubtedly magnanimous souls, but he who is situated in knowledge of me, I consider to be just like my own self. Being engaged in my transcendental service, he is sure to attain me, the highest and most perfect goal. So, those who are in the other three categories, the distress, the desire of wealth, and also the inquisitive, they can also become jnanis, but it all depends on how they progress in true devotional service by the mercy of the pure devotees and also the mercy of the Supreme Lord Himself. So there are many such examples, like those who were previously inquisitive and those who were desiring for wealth, they became pure devotees. From the Bhagavatam, we can find many such examples. So the important point here is that the pure devotees, the Krishna Devatas, as mentioned in this verse in 1.13.11, are the ones who truly understand that Lord Krishna is the absolute personality of Godhead. And we can only attain that understanding through pure devotional service, which is without any material contamination. Maharaja Yudhishthira was also always wrapped in the thought of Lord Krishna and his associates at Dwaraka. Otherwise, he could not have asked all about them from Vidura. Maharaja Yudhishthira was therefore on the same level of devotion as Vidura, although engaged in the state of affairs of the kingdom of the world. So this is another reason why Maharaja Yudhishthira and also Maharaja Parikshit, they were all able to rule the entire planet. In fact, they established themselves. Maharaja Yudhishthira established himself as the ruler of the entire world. And during the time of Maharaja Parikshit, he further expanded the empire and he became the ruler of the entire Jambudvipa itself. So they were always in, despite their material designations as Kshatriyas, they were always in the mood of devotees, and they also understood that they were ruling only as representatives of the Supreme Lord. Unlike idiots like Hiranyakashipu or Ravana, who wanted to claim the throne of the Supreme Lord. So only such idiots, they ultimately they got what they deserved, and completely different from them, the pious kings like Maharaja Yudhishthira, they were always devoted to the Supreme Lord. So all these all these attributes can only be seen in the pure devotees who are known as Krishna Devataha. So we'll continue with 1.13.12. Speak. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.